Sometimes the smallest act of kindness changes more lives than the loudest victory ever could. The morning sun had barely climbed above the red Arizona mesas when Cole Walker guided his horse along a narrow trail that wound between towering cliffs and scattered pine trees. Spring had finally softened the mountain roads after weeks of heavy rain, leaving the earth dark, rich, and fragrant beneath every careful hoofbeat. Warm light spilled across the valley while golden eagles circled high above the canyon walls. Cole had planned nothing more than delivering a sack of flour and a box of horseshoes to an aging rancher living beyond the mountain pass before returning home by sunset. His life followed simple routines. Rise before dawn, care for the horses, mend broken fences, help neighbors whenever possible. He had learned long ago that a quiet conscience weighed less than a full saddlebag. As the trail curved around a rocky hillside, he noticed movement ahead. A young Apache woman stood beside the road, gently calming a nervous mare whose front horseshoe had come loose. A woven blanket rested over one shoulder, and a leather satchel hung at her side. She examined the damaged hoof with patient hands, but the nearest settlement lay several miles away, and the rough mountain trail was no place for a frightened horse. Cole slowed his horse and stopped several yards away so he would not alarm either the woman or the mare. "Looks like she is not going much farther today," he said with a calm smile. The woman looked up carefully. Her dark eyes remained watchful, yet there was neither fear nor hostility within them. "She carried me safely until now," she answered. "The fault is not hers." Cole admired the quiet respect in her voice. He climbed down, examined the loose horseshoe, and gently shook his head. "She needs a blacksmith before she walks another mile. The next ranch is too far to reach on foot before dark." The woman glanced toward the distant mountains where gray clouds had begun gathering once again. She understood the trail as well as he did. Night arrived quickly in those canyons, and another rainstorm would turn every narrow path into slippery stone. Cole removed a coil of rope from his saddle and secured the mare beneath a nearby cottonwood tree where fresh grass and a small stream offered shelter until help could return. He then looked toward the woman with quiet courtesy. "If you are willing, I can give you a ride to your village. Tomorrow I will come back with tools and another horse to bring yours home safely." She hesitated. Accepting help from a stranger was never a small decision. Before she could answer, several merchants driving loaded wagons around the bend slowed to watch the scene unfold. Their curious eyes lingered longer than necessary before they exchanged whispers among themselves. Cole barely noticed them. He simply waited without pressure, allowing the choice to remain entirely hers. After a long moment, the young woman nodded. "My name is Nita," she said softly. "Thank you for treating my horse kindly before thinking about me." Cole smiled as he offered his hand to help her onto the horse behind him. "Cole Walker," he replied. "Out here, we all get home together or not at all." The ride lasted less than an hour, yet every passing wagon, every traveler on horseback, and every ranch hand working nearby turned to watch the unlikely pair crossing the mountain trail together. Neither Cole nor Nita paid attention to the silent witnesses scattered across the valley. They spoke only of the changing weather, the wildflowers blooming beside the creek, and the best places to find fresh spring water after heavy rain. As the roofs of the Apache village finally appeared beyond the cottonwood trees, Cole believed he had simply helped someone reach home before another storm arrived. He had no way of knowing that dozens of eyes had already carried the story ahead of them, or that before the sun disappeared beyond the western cliffs, one ordinary ride would awaken an ancient tradition that neither of them had ever expected to face. By the time Cole guided his horse to the edge of the Apache village, the quiet afternoon had already changed in ways neither he nor Nita could see. Children carrying baskets paused beside the narrow footpaths. Elders standing beneath tall cottonwood trees exchanged thoughtful glances, and several riders who had witnessed the journey through the mountains had arrived ahead of them. News always traveled faster than hoofbeats in places where every traveler carried a story. Cole gently helped Nita step down from the saddle before giving the horse a grateful pat on its neck. "I should return before the rain reaches the pass," he said with a respectful nod. Nita smiled warmly. "Tomorrow your kindness will also bring my mare home." Before Cole could answer, an elderly Apache man approached with calm, deliberate steps. His silver hair rested across the shoulders of a finely woven blanket, and a carved cedar staff supported each measured stride. His expression carried wisdom rather than judgment. Nita lowered her head respectfully. Grandfather Ashkiai. The elder looked first at Nita, then at Cole, studying neither with suspicion. Instead, he seemed to measure the quiet honesty that often revealed itself without words. Our people were told that you crossed the mountain together, he said gently. Cole nodded. Her horse lost a shoe. The trail would not have been safe before nightfall. The elder thanked him sincerely before inviting him to share water beneath the shade of the cottonwood trees. Cole accepted out of courtesy, believing he would remain only a few minutes before riding back toward his ranch. Around them, families continued their afternoon work. Women prepared fresh bread over outdoor fires while children laughed beside a clear stream flowing through the village. Horses grazed peacefully beyond rows of carefully tended gardens. The entire place felt alive with quiet purpose rather than hurried movement. As Cole drank cool spring water from a carved wooden cup, several other elders gathered nearby. They spoke softly among themselves in Apache before turning toward Nita. She listened carefully, and although her expression remained composed, a hint of surprise briefly crossed her face. Cole noticed the change immediately. Is everything all right? He asked. Nita hesitated before answering. There is an old custom that very few people still speak about. One elder stepped forward with gentle dignity. Long ago, when these mountains were far more dangerous than they are today, a woman who accepted safe passage across the high trails from an unrelated man was placed under his protection until the council determined her future. The custom existed to preserve honor during difficult times. Cole looked genuinely puzzled. I only offered someone a ride because she needed help. The elder smiled kindly. We understand that. Intentions matter. But many witnesses saw what happened, and traditions remembered by many people cannot simply be ignored. Nita met Cole's eyes. There was no fear in her expression, only quiet concern that he might misunderstand. Among my people, honor has always been more important than appearances, she said softly. Yet honor should never become a burden placed upon an innocent heart. Cole rested the wooden cup upon the table beside him. If this custom causes trouble for you, I will gladly explain exactly what happened to anyone who asks. Another elder nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that is exactly what must happen. Just then, several merchants from the wagon train entered the village carrying supplies for trade. They immediately recognized Cole and began whispering among themselves after seeing him seated beside the elders. Their curious glances spread from one person to another until the quiet conversations reached every corner of the gathering. Cole sensed that the story had already begun changing as it traveled from voice to voice. Before the first drops of rain touched the dusty ground, he realized that helping one stranded traveler had become something much larger than a simple act of kindness. And whatever came next would test not only an ancient tradition, but also the character of everyone who believed they already knew the truth. Rain settled gently across the valley through the evening, washing dust from the cottonwood leaves and filling the narrow streams that wound between the homes of the village. Cole remained longer than he had intended because the mountain trail had become too slippery to cross safely before sunrise. One of the elders quietly offered him a small guest cabin near the edge of the settlement, explaining that travelers had always been welcomed whenever dangerous weather closed the roads. Cole accepted with gratitude, still believing that once the storm passed, he would retrieve Nita's mare, return home, and leave the entire misunderstanding behind. Yet before dawn the next morning, the village gathered beneath a broad ramada where the council traditionally met whenever an important matter touched the honor of the community. Soft morning light filtered through the wooden beams while coffee simmered over a small fire and birds called from the nearby trees. The atmosphere felt peaceful rather than tense, but Cole sensed the weight of generations resting upon every quiet conversation. Nita stood beside her grandfather, her expression calm although thoughtful. She had spent much of the night speaking with the elders, explaining every detail of the journey through the mountains. She made certain they understood that Cole had shown nothing except kindness and respect from the moment they met. When everyone had taken their places, Elder Ashkiai slowly rose with the carved cedar staff resting lightly in his hand. Many customs were born during times when survival depended upon clear responsibilities, he began. Long ago, If a woman crossed the dangerous mountain trails under the protection of an unrelated man, both families immediately gathered so that no questions about honor or safety would divide the community. The custom protected dignity, not ownership. Cole listened carefully before stepping forward with quiet respect. If my actions have placed Nita in difficulty, I will gladly tell anyone exactly what happened. She accepted only a ride home because her horse needed help. Nothing more. Several elders nodded appreciatively. One of them smiled gently before answering. That is exactly why we wish to hear your own voice. Nita looked toward Cole with grateful eyes. Some people outside our village have already begun changing the story, she said softly. They do not know our traditions, yet they speak as though they do. Almost as if her words had summoned them. Two merchants who had traveled through the valley the previous afternoon requested permission to address the council. They claimed that people in Dry Creek were already repeating exaggerated tales about a cowboy and an Apache woman whose future had supposedly been decided overnight. Their careless gossip had spread from one wagon camp to another until rumor sounded more convincing than truth. Cole sighed quietly. A simple ride should never become someone else's entertainment. Elder Ashki smiled with patient understanding. Stories travel quickly. Wisdom walks much slower. The council spent the morning discussing how the misunderstanding should be answered without creating greater division between the village and the nearby town. Finally, Nita stood before everyone with calm confidence. Our ancestors created traditions to preserve honor, she said. Honor cannot exist if kindness is punished or if gratitude becomes a burden. Whatever decision is made, it must protect both truth and free choice. Her words settled over the gathering like the gentle rain that had refreshed the valley overnight. The elders exchanged thoughtful glances before quietly agreeing that no custom should ever be interpreted without remembering the spirit in which it had first been created. Cole felt relief begin replacing the uncertainty he had carried since arriving. Yet as he stepped outside after the meeting, he noticed several unfamiliar riders entering the village from the direction of Dry Creek. Their polished wagons carried the markings of wealthy trading companies, and judging by the confident smiles upon their faces, they had not come seeking the truth. They had come hoping to use a misunderstanding that was only beginning to grow. The unfamiliar riders brought an air of confidence that did not belong to people visiting simply to exchange goods. Their polished wagons rolled slowly into the village, their fine coats untouched by trail dust, and their expensive leather boots stood in sharp contrast to the worn paths beneath the cottonwood trees. Cole recognized the emblem painted on the side of one wagon. It belonged to the largest trading company in Dry Creek, a business that had quietly purchased ranches, water rights, and supply routes throughout the territory. The man leading the group introduced himself as Benjamin Crawford, speaking with a pleasant smile that never quite reached his eyes. He thanked the elders for allowing them to enter before explaining that the company hoped to build stronger commercial ties with both the town and the Apache community. His words sounded generous, yet every sentence seemed carefully chosen. Elder Ashki welcomed the visitors with the same courtesy he offered every guest, inviting them to share fresh bread and cedar tea before discussing business. As everyone gathered beneath the ramada, Crawford casually mentioned the story already spreading through Dry Creek. According to the version now circulating, a respected cowboy had accepted responsibility for an Apache woman under an ancient custom that could soon become the subject of legal confusion between the town and the tribe. Several of his companions nodded as though the rumor had already become accepted fact. Cole calmly set down his cup. That story leaves out almost everything that actually happened, he said. Crawford offered an understanding smile. Perhaps, but people often make decisions based on what they believe they have heard. Nita quietly studied the merchant while listening to every carefully measured word. She sensed that his true interest was not the tradition itself, but the uncertainty it created. If distrust grew between the town and the village, negotiations over future trade routes would become much easier for powerful businessmen to control. Elder Ashki seemed to recognize the same danger. Truth is patient, he replied. It does not need to hurry. Crawford politely inclined his head, yet he quickly shifted the conversation toward a proposal for a new wagon road crossing the mountains. The suggested route would pass dangerously close to the Apache Valley, shortening travel for merchants while disrupting grazing land and several natural springs that both ranchers and the village depended upon. Cole immediately understood why rumors had suddenly become valuable. A divided community rarely stood together against profitable plans. After the visitors departed to continue toward Dry Creek, silence settled over the gathering. The gentle breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked pine and fresh earth across the valley. Nita looked toward the distant mountains where the proposed road would eventually cut through the landscape. "If people believe we cannot even understand one another," she said softly, "they will never believe we can protect this valley together." Cole nodded slowly. "Then we do not argue with rumors. We answer them by working side by side." During the following days, Cole returned with tools to repair Nita's mare exactly as he had promised. Instead of leaving immediately, he helped several families strengthen fences damaged by spring storms while teaching younger boys how to replace worn horseshoes. In return, Apache craftsmen repaired broken wagon wheels for neighboring ranchers, and women from the village delivered woven blankets to elderly settlers whose cabins still leaked after heavy rains. Word of these quiet acts spread through Dry Creek just as quickly as the earlier gossip had spread. Some people began questioning whether the rumors truly matched the character of the people involved. Others remained skeptical. Even so, every shared meal, every repaired fence, and every helping hand slowly built a different story, one that no merchant could easily reshape. Yet late one afternoon, as Cole and Nita watched workers reinforce a small wooden bridge across the creek, a young rider arrived from town carrying an official notice announcing that a public meeting concerning the proposed road would take place within the week, and everyone understood that the future of both communities might soon depend upon what happened inside that meeting hall. The notice brought people from every corner of the valley to Dry Creek before the week had ended. Ranchers left unfinished fences, shopkeepers closed their doors early, and Apache families traveled through the mountain pass beneath clear blue skies that carried the first true warmth of spring. Wagons lined the main street while horses filled every hitching rail outside the county meeting hall. Cole arrived shortly after sunrise, riding beside Nita and several respected elders. Their journey together no longer attracted the curious stares it once had. Instead, people watched with quiet anticipation, wondering whether two communities that had spent generations living apart could now stand together when it mattered most. Inside the hall, long wooden tables displayed detailed maps of the proposed freight road. Thick red lines crossed grazing fields, streams, and the narrow valley where the Apache village had stood for generations. Benjamin Crawford welcomed the county officials with polished confidence, explaining that the new route would increase trade, create jobs, and shorten travel across the territory. His presentation sounded impressive, yet every benefit seemed measured only in money and distance. There was little mention of families, homes, or the land itself. When the chairman invited public comments, Crawford politely suggested that old traditions and isolated settlements should not prevent progress for an entire county. Quiet murmurs spread across the room. Cole remained seated, allowing others to speak first. An elderly rancher slowly rose and removed his hat. He described how Apache craftsmen had repaired his broken wagon after spring floods without asking for payment. A widowed woman explained that woven blankets from the village had kept her grandchildren warm during the harsh winter. A young blacksmith recalled how Cole and several Apache men had worked beside him for 2 days rebuilding the wooden bridge that now connected both communities. One memory followed another until the room no longer sounded divided. It sounded grateful. Finally, Cole stepped forward carrying the simple leather lead rope he had used to secure Nita's mare beneath the cottonwood tree on the day they first met. He placed it gently across the map before speaking. "This rope reminds me that every journey begins with one small decision," he said calmly. "I stopped because someone needed help. She accepted because she trusted a stranger. Everything that happened afterward came from people choosing kindness instead of suspicion." The room remained completely silent. Nita then joined him at the front. She looked toward the elders, the ranchers, the merchants, and finally the county officials. "Our tradition was never meant to force two lives together," she said with steady confidence. "It existed to protect dignity when danger left people with few choices. Today we have more wisdom than fear. Honor should protect freedom, not replace it." Even those who had doubted her listened without interruption. Elder Ashki slowly stood beside them. Customs survive because they teach compassion, he said. If they ever stop doing that, they must be understood again with open hearts. His quiet words carried greater weight than any argument raised throughout the morning. The county chairman carefully studied the room before announcing that no final decision regarding the road would be made until representatives from both communities completed a joint survey of the valley and presented a shared recommendation. Crawford's confident smile faded for the first time that day. His plan had depended upon division, yet cooperation had quietly taken its place. As the meeting ended, townspeople and villagers stepped outside beneath bright spring sunlight, speaking with one another instead of about one another. Cole looked toward Nita as a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass through the street. Neither of them knew what the final decision would be, but both understood something important had already changed. The greatest distance they had crossed was never the mountain trail. It had always been the space between misunderstanding and trust, and together they had taken the first lasting steps across it. The week that followed transformed the joint survey into something far greater than a simple inspection of roads and property lines. Every morning before sunrise, county officials, ranchers, Apache elders, surveyors, and ordinary townspeople met beneath the cottonwood trees before riding together through the valley. Instead of measuring only distance and elevation, they began discovering the lives connected to every stream, pasture, and trail. Children proudly showed the surveyors the small orchards their families had planted beside the creek. Elder Ashki explained how certain springs had supplied clean water through generations of drought, while ranchers described how the same valley protected livestock during harsh winters. The maps slowly filled with details that no outsider had ever bothered to notice. Benjamin Crawford accompanied the survey during the first 2 days, maintaining the same confident smile he had worn inside the meeting hall. Yet with every stop, another family shared a story of cooperation between the village and nearby ranches. A blacksmith pointed toward horseshoes crafted with Apache ironwork techniques. A rancher's wife displayed woven blankets that had become treasured family heirlooms. Even the surveyors admitted they had underestimated the value of the valley because they had measured only land instead of community. Crawford gradually spoke less, realizing that facts gathered by many honest voices left little room for carefully shaped rumors. On the final afternoon, the entire group climbed a rocky overlook where the proposed freight road would eventually descend into the valley. From that height, they could see grazing fields, gardens, streams reflecting the afternoon sun, smoke rising peacefully from cabins and village homes alike, and narrow trails connecting neighbors who had quietly depended upon one another for years. The county chairman removed his hat and remained silent for several moments before speaking. Progress should never require us to erase the people who already belong here. His words carried farther than anyone expected. Nita looked toward the gathered elders before stepping forward with calm confidence. "There is one matter still left unfinished," she said gently. Every eye turned toward her. "The custom that brought all of us together has been discussed by many people who never understood its purpose. Today our council wishes to speak clearly." Elder Ashki unfolded a small leather pouch and removed a braided leather cord decorated with turquoise beads. He placed it across both hands before addressing everyone present. "This cord has long represented protection freely given during dangerous journeys," he explained. Some remembered only the responsibility. They forgot the freedom that gave the custom its honor. He then turned toward Cole. "You fulfilled every part of that responsibility without being asked. You protected a traveler, respected her dignity, returned for her horse as promised, and spoke truth even when false stories would have served you better. No council could ask more of an honorable man." Cole lowered his head respectfully. "I only did what I hoped someone would do for my own family." Elder Ashki smiled warmly. "Exactly." Nita accepted the braided cord from her grandfather before facing the gathering. "No tradition should ever decide a person's future without the willing heart of those who must live it," she said. "Our council therefore declares that this custom shall forever be understood as a promise of protection, never an obligation of marriage. Honor lives through choice." A quiet murmur of approval spread through both communities. The county chairman nodded with genuine admiration, while several ranchers removed their hats in respect. Even those who had arrived expecting disagreement found themselves witnessing something entirely different. An ancient tradition had not been abandoned. It had been restored to its original spirit through compassion rather than conflict. As the evening sun settled behind the distant mesas, Cole and Nita stood together overlooking the valley that had unknowingly changed both of their lives. Neither spoke for several peaceful moments. Then Nita smiled gently. It seems one simple ride carried us farther than either of us expected. Cole laughed softly while watching the golden light settle across the mountains. And somehow, I think the journey is only beginning. The days that followed carried a quiet peace unlike anything the valley had known before. Word of the council's decision traveled across ranches, trading posts, and distant homesteads far faster than the old rumors ever had. People no longer repeated stories about an ancient custom forcing two strangers together. Instead, they spoke about a tradition that had found new life because those who honored it had also found the courage to understand its true purpose. Cole returned to his ranch each morning before sunrise, yet his routine no longer ended at the property fence. Almost every afternoon found him riding toward the Apache village with wagon parts that needed repair, seed for the community gardens, or supplies requested by families preparing for the coming harvest. Just as often, Apache craftsmen and farmers traveled to neighboring ranches, bringing woven blankets, carved tools, and knowledge that generations had preserved among the mountains. The narrow trail where Cole had first met Nita slowly transformed into the busiest road in the valley, not because merchants demanded it, but because neighbors chose to use it. One bright Saturday morning, Dry Creek held its annual spring market. For the first time in memory, ranch families and Apache families organized the celebration together. Long wooden tables stretched across the center of town beneath colorful banners fluttering in the warm breeze. Fresh bread, smoked meat, woven baskets, polished leather saddles, handmade pottery, and bright turquoise jewelry filled every display. Children laughed while racing between the market stalls without noticing which families had once lived on opposite sides of old misunderstandings. Elder Ashki slowly walked through the crowd with quiet satisfaction shining in his eyes. "The strongest bridge," he whispered to Cole as they watched the gathering, "is the one people forget was ever missing." Cole smiled, understanding exactly what the old man meant. Later that afternoon, the county chairman arrived carrying the completed survey documents. Surrounded by townspeople and village elders alike, he announced that the proposed freight road would officially follow a different route beyond the eastern ridge, preserving the valley, its springs, its grazing fields, and every family who depended upon them. The decision was greeted not by loud celebration, but by grateful silence. Many people removed their hats. Others simply looked toward the mountains, appreciating them in a way they never had before. Benjamin Crawford stood quietly near the back of the gathering. His company would still build its road, but not at the cost of a community that had learned to stand together. After a long moment, he approached Elder Ashki and extended his hand. "Perhaps I measured value too narrowly," he admitted. The elder accepted the handshake with gentle dignity. There is always room to learn another trail. As the sun drifted lower across the western mesas, music filled the town square. Families shared meals beneath the cottonwood trees while travelers from distant counties paused to admire the unusual sight of two communities celebrating side by side. Cole and Nita walked slowly beyond the edge of the market toward the same overlook where the mountains framed the entire valley below. Neither hurried to speak. The gentle wind carried the scent of wildflowers, warm pine, and fresh earth after spring rain. Finally, Nita reached into the small leather pouch fastened at her belt and removed the braided turquoise cord her grandfather had entrusted to her after the council meeting. She held it carefully before offering it to Cole. "This no longer belongs only to my people," she said softly. "It belongs to everyone who chooses honor with kindness." Cole accepted the cord with quiet gratitude, then looked toward Nita with the same calm respect he had shown on the mountain trail the day they first met. Nothing had been forced between them. Nothing had been promised by obligation. Yet standing together beneath the wide Arizona sky, both quietly realized that the freedom they had protected for one another had become the strongest foundation either heart could ever hope to find. Summer settled gently across the Arizona mountains, painting the valley with fields of wildflowers that swayed beneath warm afternoon breezes. The trail that had once been remembered for uncertainty had become the safest route connecting Dry Creek with the Apache village. Travelers now stopped beneath the same cottonwood tree where Cole had first tied Nita's injured mare, often sharing water, stories, and directions before continuing their journeys. Many visitors never realized they were resting beside the place where an ordinary act of kindness had quietly changed the future of an entire valley. Cole continued visiting the village almost every week, although no promise required him to do so. Sometimes he brought seed, horseshoes, or lumber from the sawmill. Other days he arrived carrying nothing except an extra saddle, blanket, and enough time to help wherever another pair of hands was needed. Nita greeted him with the same warm smile each visit, whether they spent the day repairing irrigation channels, gathering herbs in the foothills, or teaching children from both communities how to care for horses without fear. Their friendship grew naturally because neither expected anything from the other except honesty. As the weeks became months, people stopped whispering whenever they saw them riding together. The sight had become as ordinary as sunrise over the mesas. One quiet evening, Elder Ashkiai invited Cole to walk with him beyond the village where an ancient cottonwood overlooked the winding creek below. The old man moved slowly, leaning upon his cedar staff, yet every step carried quiet confidence earned through many seasons. After several moments of peaceful silence, he reached into a small leather pouch and removed a smooth stone marked with a simple circle carved at its center. He placed it in Cole's hand. "Long before roads or towns existed here," he said softly, "our people gave this stone to those who understood that protecting another person begins with respecting their freedom." Cole studied the weathered carving. "I am honored to receive it." Elder Ashkiai smiled gently. "You have already earned it. The question is whether you understand why." Cole looked toward the valley below where ranches and village homes shared the same evening light. "Because kindness asks for nothing in return." The elder nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Exactly." Later that night, as families gathered around small campfires beneath a sky crowded with bright stars, music drifted through the village from handmade flutes and softly beaten drums. Children chased fireflies between the trees while elders exchanged stories with ranchers who no longer arrived as strangers. Nita found Cole sitting quietly beside the creek, skipping small stones across the calm water. She sat beside him without speaking for a while, listening to the gentle sounds of summer. Finally, she smiled. "Do you remember the first thing you said when you saw my horse?" Cole laughed softly. "I remember saying she was not going much farther that day." Nita nodded. "Neither were we. At least, not without meeting each other." They shared an easy silence before she continued. "Many people believe destiny is something decided before we are born." She looked toward the stars reflected upon the creek. "I think destiny is built one good decision at a time." Cole slowly turned the carved stone in his hand before looking at her with quiet sincerity. "If that is true, then the best decision I ever made was stopping on that mountain trail." Nita lowered her eyes for a moment, her smile carrying both gratitude and something deeper that neither of them needed to name. No council had chosen what now quietly lived between them. No custom had demanded it. Day after day, through respect, patience, and shared purpose, two hearts had simply walked the same trail until they discovered they no longer wished to walk it apart. And as the first shooting star crossed the wide western sky, both silently understood that the journey ahead belonged entirely to their own free choice. 5 years passed, and every season seemed to leave another quiet reminder of how one ordinary ride through the mountains had changed far more than two lives. The narrow trail where Cole had first stopped for a stranded traveler had become a well-kept road lined with young cottonwood trees planted by children from both the ranches and the Apache village. Travelers often paused beneath their growing shade, filling canteens from the clear spring beside the path before continuing their journeys. Few of them knew why the place felt unusually peaceful, but everyone seemed to leave carrying a little more hope than they had brought with them. Cole's ranch had grown into a gathering place where neighbors borrowed tools, repaired wagons, and shared harvest meals without asking where someone had been born. Just beyond the eastern ridge, the Apache village flourished as well. New gardens stretched beside the creek. Horses grazed peacefully across protected meadows, and trade with Dry Creek brought prosperity without sacrificing tradition. The braided turquoise cord rested beside the carved stone upon the mantel inside Cole's cabin, while the old lead rope from Nita's injured mare remained carefully coiled nearby as a quiet reminder that extraordinary journeys often begin with ordinary decisions. One warm autumn afternoon, families from both communities gathered beneath the great cottonwood tree for a celebration unlike any they had shared before. There were no speeches about old misunderstandings and no discussions of customs that once caused uncertainty. Instead, there was music, fresh bread, roasted corn, laughter, and children racing through golden leaves without noticing that their grandparents had once lived separated by suspicion. Elder Ashki, now walking more slowly than ever, watched the gathering with peaceful satisfaction shining in his gentle eyes. Before sunset, he called everyone together beneath the wide branches of the ancient tree. In his hands, he carried the same braided turquoise cord that had once symbolized protection freely given. He smiled warmly before placing it into the joined hands of Cole and Nita. Years ago, he said softly, people believed this cord could decide a future. Today we know better. It only reminds us that every future worth keeping begins with a free heart. Cole looked toward Nita, seeing the same quiet strength that had first impressed him beside the mountain trail. There was a time when I thought helping someone simply meant getting them home safely, he said with a gentle smile. Now I know home can become much larger than one cabin or one ranch. Nita's eyes reflected the warm colors of the setting sun. And sometimes, she replied softly, the safest journey begins with trusting a stranger who chooses kindness before comfort. As friends and neighbors looked on with warm smiles, Cole reached into his pocket and removed a simple silver ring crafted by the blacksmith in Dry Creek, its surface engraved with a small cottonwood leaf beside a mountain trail. He held it carefully before speaking with quiet sincerity. No law brought me here. No tradition keeps me here. I stand here because every day beside you has been a choice I would gladly make again. Tears of quiet happiness filled several eyes throughout the gathering as Nita accepted the ring with a grateful smile. Their promise belonged to no counsel, no custom, and no expectation except the one they freely offered each other. As evening settled across the valley, lanterns glowed beneath the trees while music drifted into the cooling air. Children continued laughing beside the creek. Ranchers and Apache families shared stories around the same fire, and the mountains stood peacefully beneath a sky filled with countless stars. Long after the celebration ended, travelers would continue telling the story of the cowboy and the Apache woman. Some believed it was a tale about an old custom. Others remembered the beautiful valley it helped protect. But those who truly understood its meaning always ended the story the same way. In the American West, the greatest victories were not won by force or fortune. They were earned by ordinary people who chose compassion when fear seemed easier, proving that one small act of kindness could become the beginning of a legacy strong enough to outlive every rumor, every misunderstanding, and even time itself.